They stripped his badge away on a Tuesday morning. No explanation, no courtesy, just cold efficiency and silence. Within minutes, 3 FBI sedans appeared in the precinct parking lot. No radio chatter, no advance warning. They surrounded the building and waited. Not for the chief, not for the case files, for him. From which city in the world are you watching this today? If this story of sacrifice and hidden truth intrigues you, please hit that subscribe button to join us for more tales from America's finest. Dawn broke gray and cold over Chicago's South Side. Detective Sergeant Matt Stone stood in the precinct's bullpen, coffee growing cold in his hand as he reviewed the overnight reports. At 52, he carried himself with the measured confidence of a man who'd spent 3 decades walking the thin blue line. His graying hair was cropped military short, and a small scar cut through his left eyebrow, a souvenir from his rookie year that caught the light when he turned his head. "Stone, I need confirmation on the Rodriguez case," witnesses called Detective Rivera, a young officer eager to prove herself in the department's most challenging district. "All statements taken and filed," Matt replied, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd seen it all. "Grand jury meets Thursday." Stone wasn't the most popular detective in the 15th district, but he was the most respected. Known as by-the-book Stone, he'd built a reputation on meticulous police work and unshakable integrity. In his 15 years with the detective division, not a single case had been thrown out due to procedural errors or contaminated evidence. He glanced at the precinct clock. Morning briefing in 10 minutes. Another day fighting crime in one of Chicago's toughest neighborhoods. Stone had been working a particularly sensitive case. Allegations of corruption within the department itself. Drug money disappearing from evidence lockups. Witness statements being altered. Cases mysteriously falling apart just before trial. Matt was reviewing his notes when he noticed a change in the atmosphere. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Officers looked toward the front entrance where 2 men in dark suits stood, scanning the room with predatory efficiency. Internal Affairs didn't visit the 15th district unless someone was in serious trouble. Detective Stone, the taller of the two, said, though it wasn't really a question. They knew exactly who he was. "That's me," Matt replied, setting down his coffee cup with deliberate calm despite the ice forming in his stomach. "Sir, you need to come with us." Before he could respond, Captain Rodriguez's voice crackled over the precinct PA system. "Detective Stone, stand down from all active cases immediately." The bullpen went silent. Even the constant chatter of police radios seemed to fade as every eye in the room turned toward him. Fellow officers he'd worked alongside for years suddenly found their paperwork fascinating, unable to meet his gaze. "Mind telling me what this is about?" Stone asked, his voice steady despite the surreal nature of the moment. The IA officers didn't answer. Instead, one produced a pair of handcuffs while the other stepped forward to remove Stone's service weapon from its holster. "Turn around, detective," the first officer said quietly, almost apologetically. Matt's jaw tightened, the only sign of his shock. He looked around the bullpen at officers he'd mentored, partners he'd trusted with his life, a captain he'd served faithfully for over a decade. No one moved to intervene. Some actually stepped back, as if corruption might be contagious. With deliberate dignity, Matt placed his hands behind his back. The metal cuffs clicked shut with a sound that seemed to echo through the suddenly silent precinct. The second IA officer produced scissors and cut Matt's police ID badge from his uniform, letting the pieces fall to the worn linoleum floor. "I have a right to know the charges," Stone said, his voice controlled but edged with steel. Neither officer responded. From across the bullpen, Matt could see Captain Rodriguez watching from his office window. When their eyes met, the captain looked away. Whispers began rippling through the assembled officers. "Corruption charges, has to be. Always wondered about that expensive watch he wears. Heard he's been meeting with known criminals." The IA officers took Matt by the arms and escorted him toward the exit. As they passed Detective Rivera, the young woman awkwardly moved to Stone's desk, clearly uncomfortable with suddenly inheriting his active cases. Matt walked with his head high, refusing to acknowledge the stares and whispers that followed in his wake. 15 years of service, of solved cases and protected citizens, evaporated in an instant. Now he was something else, a suspect, a disappointment, a cautionary tale. They drove him to a federal building downtown, through corridors he'd never seen before, to a small windowless room with fluorescent lights and a metal table bolted to the floor. After removing the handcuffs, they left him alone with nothing but his thoughts and a growing sense of unreality. Matt rubbed his wrists and tried to make sense of what was happening. The room was deliberately disorienting. No clocks, no windows, just harsh lighting that made it impossible to judge the passage of time. A security camera watched from one corner, its red recording light a constant reminder that his every move was being monitored. Through a small window in the door, he could see federal agents moving with unusual urgency. Something big was happening, bigger than a simple corruption investigation. After what felt like hours, the door finally opened. Two men in expensive suits entered, their faces neutral to the point of being blank. FBI, Matt guessed, though neither were visible identification. Detective Stone, the older of the two, began, settling into the chair across from him. "We'd like to ask you about Operation Crossfire." Matt's brow furrowed. "Never heard of it." The agent's mouth twitched into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Interesting, considering your central role in its success." "There's been some mistake," Matt said firmly. "I've never been involved in any federal operation called Crossfire." The second agent, still standing by the door, snorted softly. "The innocent act isn't necessary anymore, Detective." "This isn't an act," Stone replied, his patience beginning to fray. "I want a lawyer present, and I want to know exactly what I'm being accused of." Before either agent could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the building. Both men tensed, exchanging meaningful glances. "We'll continue this shortly," the seated agent said, gathering his files. They left quickly, the door locking automatically behind them. Alone again, Matt returned to the small window, trying to understand what was happening. The federal building was now in full emergency mode. Agents at every station, urgent conversations, secure phones ringing constantly. The door opened again, but instead of the FBI agents, a young medical technician entered with a small kit. "Sir, I need to collect a blood sample," she said, avoiding eye contact. "Why?" Matt asked. "Orders, sir. That's all I know." Seeing little choice, Matt extended his arm. As the technician prepared the needle, he noticed something odd about the medical bracelet she was attaching to the blood sample. The identification number wasn't his badge number or social security number. It was something else entirely. "There's an error on that label," he said. "That's not my identification number." The technician didn't respond, quickly drawing the blood and labeling the vial. She seemed nervous, eager to complete her task and leave. After she departed, Matt moved back to the window. He could see agents gathered around multiple computer screens, all displaying what appeared to be surveillance footage. One screen showed the exterior of his own apartment building. Another showed his usual coffee shop. A third displayed the precinct where he'd worked for 15 years. This wasn't a simple corruption investigation. This was something much larger and more complex. The scar above his eyebrow began to throb, something that hadn't happened in years. As he touched it, fragmented memories flickered at the edges of his consciousness. A hospital room, a man in a military uniform, paperwork with classifications he couldn't quite remember. Operation Crossfire. The name meant nothing to his conscious mind, but something deeper, some buried part of his psyche, whispered recognition. The door opened again, but this time it was the older FBI agent alone, his demeanor completely changed. "Detective Stone, or rather, I should say Agent Stone, you're needed upstairs." "Agent Stone?" The words hit him like a physical blow. "I don't understand," Matt said, though even as he spoke, memories were beginning to surface like oil bubbling up from deep underground. "The activation sequence has been completed," the agent explained as they walked toward an elevator. "Your cover identity is being dissolved as we speak." Cover identity. The word should have been meaningless, but they triggered a cascade of returning memories. A briefing room in Quantico. A woman with silver hair explaining the psychological conditioning that would allow him to completely forget his real identity. The surgical implantation of a subcutaneous transmitter that would activate only when specific circumstances were met. The elevator opened onto a floor Matt had never seen before, filled with screens displaying surveillance footage from across Chicago. At the center of it all stood a woman he suddenly recognized. Director Sarah Chun, FBI Organized Crime Task Force. "Welcome back, Agent Marcus Stone," she said, using a name that felt both foreign and familiar. "You've been under deep cover for 12 years. 12 years. Not 15 years as a detective. 12 years as a federal agent embedded within the Chicago Police Department to investigate a massive corruption network that reached into City Hall, the courts, and the highest levels of law enforcement." "The scar," Matt said, touching his eyebrow as memories flooded back, "contains a biodegradable transmitter," Director Chin confirmed, "activated by specific stress hormones that would only be present if your cover was blown or the mission reached its conclusion. When you were arrested this morning, it sent an extraction signal to our emergency response team." Matt, Marcus, looked around the room at faces he was beginning to recognize. Federal agents he'd worked with before his deep cover assignment. Technical specialists who had helped create his elaborate false identity as a Chicago cop. Detective Matt Stone never existed, Chun continued. "You were Special Agent Marcus Stone, FBI, assigned to the Organized Crime Task Force. For the past 12 years, you've been gathering intelligence on one of the largest police corruption networks in American history." A technician approached with a file folder. "Sir, the subject had been successfully identified through Agent Stone's intelligence. We have enough evidence to bring down the entire network. 47 individuals, including 23 sworn officers, 8 court personnel, 6 city officials, and 10 organized crime figures." Marcus felt the weight of 12 years settling on his shoulders. 12 years of living as someone else. 12 years of watching good cops struggle against a system corrupted from within, unable to help directly without blowing his cover. 12 years of building cases as Detective Stone while secretly feeding intelligence to the FBI as Agent Stone. "The arrest this morning was theater," Director Chin explained. "We needed a plausible reason to extract you before the final arrest began. Your fellow officers think you've been taken into federal custody on corruption charges. In reality, you're about to help us clean house." That evening, Marcus Stone sat in his apartment. The same apartment Detective Matt Stone had called home for 12 years, trying to reconcile 2 lifetimes of memories. The FBI had returned his real credentials, his actual service record, his genuine personal effects that had been in storage for over a decade. On his coffee table lay 2 badges, the Chicago PD shield that had been cut from his uniform that morning, and his original FBI credentials showing his real name and assignment. 2 identities that had somehow coexisted in the same body, the same life for 12 years. His phone rang. Director Chin's voice was crisp and professional. "How are you adjusting to the reintegration?" "It's complex," Marcus admitted. 12 years is a long time to live as someone else. The psychological conditioning was designed to be reversible, but we knew the readjustment would be challenging. There's no shame in seeking counseling. Marcus looked out his window at the streets he'd patrolled as Detective Stone, protecting citizens who would never know that their neighborhood cop was actually a federal agent working a case that would reshape Chicago law enforcement. "What happens to the officers at the 15th District?" he asked. "The good ones who had nothing to do with the corruption? They'll be cleared and reassigned where appropriate. Detective Rivera, for instance, she's being considered for promotion to sergeant. Your recommendation in her file was quite favorable." Marcus smiled despite everything. Some good could come from all this deception. "And me? What happens to Agent Marcus Stone now?" "That's your choice. You could return to federal service, take a supervisory role with the task force. Or," Chin paused, "there's another deep cover assignment. Different city, different identity. The corruption we've uncovered in Chicago isn't unique." Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the weight of 12 years of isolation, of maintaining a false identity, so completely that he'd sometimes forgotten who he really was. Could he do it again? Start over in another city, become another person, live another life for the greater good? I need time to think about it. Of course. Take all the time you need. A week later, Marcus Stone stood in the Chicago Police Department's main auditorium, not as Detective Matt Stone, but as Special Agent Marcus Stone, FBI. Before him sat hundreds of police officers, federal agents, and city officials gathered for the largest corruption bust in Chicago's history. Superintendent Williams approached the podium, his face grave. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to introduce Special Agent Marcus Stone, who for the past 12 years has served this city and this nation in a capacity that required extraordinary sacrifice. The assembled officers, many of whom knew him as Detective Stone, stared in stunned silence as the superintendent continued. Agent Stone voluntarily surrendered his identity, his career progression, his personal relationships, and 12 years of his life to expose corruption that threatened the integrity of law enforcement in this city. His work has led to the indictment of 47 individuals and the recovery of over $12 million in stolen drug money. A murmur ran through the audience. Some of the officers from the 15th District looked ashamed of how they treated him during his arrest. Others appeared confused, trying to reconcile the Detective Stone they'd known with the federal agent standing before them. Agent Stone's sacrifice exemplifies the highest traditions of law enforcement, the superintendent concluded. His willingness to become someone else entirely in service of justice honors every badge in this room. As the ceremony concluded, Marcus found himself surrounded by officers wanting to apologize, to shake his hand, to understand how he'd maintained such a complete deception for so long. Detective Rivera approached, her face a mixture of admiration and embarrassment. Agent Stone, I'm sorry about how I acted when you were arrested. If I'd known. You acted exactly as you should have, Marcus interrupted gently. You followed procedure and supported your chain of command. That's what makes you a good cop. She nodded, visibly relieved. Thank you, sir. As the crowd dispersed, Marcus walked through the precinct one last time, past the desk where Detective Matt Stone had worked for 12 years, past the interview rooms where he'd questioned suspects while secretly building federal cases, past the coffee machine where he'd shared countless conversations with officers who never knew his true identity. Outside, Director Chun waited beside a black sedan. Have you made your decision? She asked. Marcus looked back at the precinct, then at the Chicago skyline where Detective Matt Stone had served and protected, where Agent Marcus Stone had gathered intelligence that would reshape law enforcement in the city. I'm ready for the next assignment, he said finally. What do you need me? Chun smiled and opened the car door. Detroit. The corruption there makes Chicago look like a minor infraction. You'll be Detective James Mitchell, 15-year veteran, recently transferred from narcotics to homicide. As the sedan pulled away from the curb, Marcus Stone, soon-to-be Detective James Mitchell, watched Chicago disappear in a rearview mirror. But before they could leave the city entirely, Chin's phone buzzed with an urgent message. We need to make a stop, she said, directing the driver to change course. There's someone you need to see. 20 minutes later, they stood outside a hospital room where an elderly man lay connected to various machines. Through the glass, Marcus could see him clearly. Captain Rodriguez, his former superior at the 15th District. Heart attack, Chin explained quietly. Happened 3 hours after the arrest began. When he realized how deep the corruption went, how many officers under his command were involved, it broke him. Marcus felt a weight settle in his chest. Rodriguez had been a good cop once, before the system wore him down, before the politics and the pressure made him look the other way when he should have acted. Does he know? Marcus asked. About you being FBI? Yes. It was one of the last things we told him before. Chin trailed off. Marcus pushed open the door and entered the room. Rodriguez's eyes were open, though he looked friendlier than Marcus had ever seen him. Matt, Rodriguez whispered, then caught himself. Sorry. Marcus. Captain, Marcus said, pulling a chair beside the bed. How are you feeling? Rodriguez managed a weak smile, like an old fool who should have seen what was happening in his own house. His voice was barely audible. 12 years you were there. 12 years you watched me turn away from problems I should have faced. You weren't part of the corruption, Captain. We know that. No, but I wasn't part of the solution either. Rodriguez's eyes grew distant. You know what the worst part is? I liked Detective Matt Stone. Respected him. Thought he was one of the few good ones left. Turns out he was the only completely honest cop in the building, and he wasn't even really a cop. Marcus leaned forward. Every case I closed as Detective Stone, every victim I helped, every criminal I took off the streets, that was real. The badge might have been fake, but the work wasn't. Rodriguez nodded slowly. Rivera told me what you said to her. About following procedure, doing her job right. You could have been bitter about how everyone treated you during the arrest, but you weren't. He paused, struggling with each word. That tells me everything I need to know about who you really are, Agent Stone. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Rodriguez spoke again. The new captain they're bringing in, Sarah Martinez from the 3rd District. She's clean, a real reformer. The 15th is going to be rebuilt from the ground up. Your work is going to save that precinct. That was always the goal, Marcus said. I know. And I want you to know that even though Detective Matt Stone was a fiction, he was the best officer I ever had the privilege to serve with. After leaving the hospital, Marcus made one more stop before departing Chicago. Graceland Cemetery, on the north side, where a simple headstone marked the grave of Detective Robert Stone, the real person whose identity had been partially used to create Matt Stone's background. Detective Robert Stone had died in the line of duty 8 years before Marcus's deep cover assignment began. A traffic stop gone wrong, a nervous drug dealer with a gun, a split-second decision that ended a promising career. The FBI had used his service record, his commendations, his reputation as the foundation for Matt Stone's identity. Marcus knelt beside the grave, placing a small Chicago PD memorial flag against the headstone. "Thank you for lending me your name, Detective," he said quietly. "I try to honor it." The wind picked up, rustling the leaves of the old oak trees that shaded the cemetery. Marcus imagined he could feel the weight of all the identities he'd carried, all the names he'd worn like masks in service of something larger than himself. 3 hours later, Marcus sat in a secure briefing room at O'Hare Airport, studying files for his next assignment. Detective James Mitchell's background was already being constructed, a 15-year veteran of the Detroit Police Department with a stellar record in narcotics before transferring to homicide. Military service in Afghanistan. Divorced. No children. A clean slate ready to be filled with new memories, new relationships, new lies. Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, the FBI's chief psychological consultant, entered with a cup of coffee and a concerned expression. "Agent Stone, I need to ask you some questions before we proceed with the conditioning for your next assignment." Marcus looked up from the files. "Is there a problem?" 12 years is an unprecedented length of time for deep cover. Most agents begin to experience identity fragmentation after 3 to 4 years. The fact that you maintain Detective Stone's persona so completely for so long is remarkable, but also concerning. She sat across from him, her expression professional but kind. "Tell me, when you think about your life in Chicago, do you think of it as Marcus Stone's experiences or Matt Stone's?" The question caught him off guard. Marcus considered it carefully before answering. "Both. Neither. It's complicated." He set down the Detroit files. Matt Stone had relationships with his fellow officers, memories of cases solved and victims helped. But Marcus Stone was the one analyzing patterns, gathering intelligence, building the federal case. They existed simultaneously. Dr. Hartwell made notes on her tablet. "And now, which identity feels more real to you?" "Marcus Stone is my name," he said without hesitation. "But Matt Stone, he became real too. The dedication to justice, the commitment to protecting civilians, the brotherhood with other officers, that wasn't an act. It became part of who I am. That's what concerns me," she said gently. Deep cover agents who maintain false identities for extended periods sometimes have difficulty distinguishing between their authentic selves and their assigned personas. The psychological conditioning we use to create these identities is powerful, but it can have lasting effects. Marcus felt a chill of understanding. Are you saying I might not be able to tell the difference between Marcus Stone and James Mitchell after another long-term assignment? I'm saying we need to be very careful. The human psyche wasn't designed to compartmentalize identity the way we ask our deep cover agents to do. What you've already accomplished is extraordinary, but asking you to do it again so soon after extraction. She paused. I'm recommending a 6-month psychological evaluation period before any new assignment. Director Chen entered the briefing room before Marcus could respond. How's our agent holding up, Doctor? That's what we're determining, Dr. Hartwell replied diplomatically. Chen studied Marcus with the practiced eye of someone who had run deep cover operations for 20 years. Agent Stone, I need your honest assessment. Are you ready for Detroit, or do you need time to reintegrate? Marcus thought about the question seriously. He thought about Captain Rodriguez in his hospital bed, broken by the revelation of corruption under his command. He thought about Detective Rivera, eager and honest, trying to do good work in a corrupt system. He thought about the victims who would never know that their cases had been solved by a federal agent pretending to be a city cop. I'm ready, he said finally, but I want Dr. Hartwell to monitor the conditioning process. If there are signs that I'm losing track of my authentic identity, I want safeguards in place. Chen nodded. Agreed. We'll also establish regular check-ins with the extraction team. Any sign of psychological distress, any indication that the assignment is compromising your mental health, and we pull you out immediately. Detective James Mitchell stepped off the plane at Detroit Metro, carrying a single duffel bag and a service record that showed 15 years of distinguished service with the Detroit Police Department. He had the weathered look of a cop who'd seen too much, done too much, sacrificed too much for the job. But behind his eyes, Marcus Stone watched and remembered. This time, he'd insisted on maintaining conscious awareness of his true identity throughout the assignment. The psychological conditioning was lighter, more reversible. James Mitchell would be real enough to fool his new colleagues, but Marcus Stone would never completely disappear. At the baggage claim, a tall black woman in a detective's shield approached him. You must be Mitchell, she said, extending her hand. Detective Lieutenant Angela Washington, Homicide Division. Welcome to the Motor City. Good to be here, Marcus replied, slipping effortlessly into James Mitchell's personality. Tough, experienced, slightly cynical, but still committed to the job. As they walked toward Washington's unmarked car, she briefed him on the situation. Corruption here makes Chicago look like a Sunday school picnic, she said bluntly. We've got dirty cops at every level, judges taking bribes, evidence disappearing from lockup, witnesses vanishing before trial. It's a mess. Sounds like my kind of challenge, Mitchell replied. Washington studied him as they got into the car. Your file says you transferred for narcotics after some kind of incident. Want to talk about it? Marcus had prepared for this question. James Mitchell's backstory included a shooting incident that had gone bad, a drug dealer who died under questionable circumstances, a subsequent internal investigation that had cleared him but left him wanting a fresh start. Rather not, he said simply. Clean slate, new city, new cases. That's all I'm looking for. Fair enough. We all got our ghosts. As they drove through Detroit streets, Marcus surveyed his new territory. Abandoned buildings stood next to gentrified neighborhoods. Police cars with questionable modifications parked outside bars that stayed open too late. Citizens who looked away when cops passed by, having learned that law enforcement couldn't necessarily be trusted. This would be his world for the next several years. Detective James Mitchell would build relationships, solve cases, gain the trust of corrupt officers who would eventually incriminate themselves. And somewhere beneath it all, Marcus Stone would gather intelligence, build federal cases, and work toward the day when Detroit's law enforcement could be trusted again. One more thing, Washington said as they pulled up to the precinct. We got a new captain coming in next week. Sarah Martinez, transferred from Chicago. Word is she's a real hard-ass reformer. Marcus allowed himself a small smile. Captain Martinez, the same officer who was cleaning up the 15th District in Chicago. The FBI was putting their people in position, creating a network of honest cops who could help rebuild these corrupted departments. "Looking forward to working with her," he said. As Detective James Mitchell walked into his new precinct for the first time, Marcus Stone made a mental note of everything he observed. The officers who looked away when he introduced himself, the evidence locker with the broken security camera, the dispatch sergeant who took phone calls in hushed tones. All of it would go into his reports. All of it would become part of the federal case that would eventually clean house in Detroit, just as it had in Chicago. But tonight, James Mitchell would go home to a small apartment on the west side, open a beer, and watch the local news like any other cop at the end of a long shift. He would build a life, make friends, become part of the community he was secretly working to save. And somewhere deep inside, Marcus Stone would remember who he really was and why this work mattered. Not for the glory or recognition. His name would never appear in news stories about the corruption bust that would eventually come. But for the victims who deserve justice, the honest cops who deserve to work in a clean system, and the communities that deserve to trust their law enforcement. The badge that never came off wasn't made of metal and wasn't worn on his chest. It was carved into his soul, the commitment to serve and protect, no matter the personal cost, no matter how many names he had to wear, no matter how long the deception had to last. Detective Matt Stone was gone, dissolved like morning mist. Agent Marcus Stone had become Detective James Mitchell. But the commitment to justice, the willingness to sacrifice everything for the greater good, that would live on in whatever name he carried next. Because sometimes the most important victories are the ones no one ever hears about. The ones achieved not by heroes whose names are known, but by ghosts who surrender their very identities to protect and serve. And sometimes, the heaviest badge of all is the one that no one else can see. In Detroit, as in Chicago, that invisible badge would continue its work. Patient, persistent, and completely committed to the truth that some prices are worth paying, some sacrifices are worth making, and some battles are worth fighting even when no one will ever know your real name.